In the previous class, I told you guys that you cannot add two different types together, isn't it? For example, if you have side 1 is equal to 5 and side 2 is equal to 7. So I said side 3 is equal to side 1 plus side 2. Then I said this will be an error, right? Because you cannot add you cannot add an integer to a what? To a string. Can you still remember this? Okay, good. But this 7 is a string. It is not an integer. So we can actually convert this to an integer. We can convert different data types from one type to the other. Is that understood? For example, I can convert from a string to an integer only if that string is numeric. Is that understood? Only if that string is what? Is numeric. If I have a string as 5, as let's say z, I can't convert this to an integer because it is not numeric. Is that understood? So how do you convert to an integer? If you want to convert a string to an integer, then you write side 2 is equal to the function int. So this function converts from other data type to an integer. Is that understood? So if I write int side 2, what am I trying to do, guys? I'm trying to convert z to an integer, isn't it? Is z a numeric value? No. So let's run this code. It is not converting because z is not a numeric value. Now, if I have side 2 as 10, is 10 a numeric value? But is this an integer? It is a? So that means I'm converting string to an integer. So then this converts and there will be no error. Is that understood? So if I want to see the result, then I can print side 3. So in this case, side 3 becomes what? 15, isn't it? So when you run this, this is equal to 15. Can you see that? So in this point, I have converted this string to an integer before I added. So that means you may have some string that are numeric and you want to use them as a number, you have to convert. I can also convert from other data types to a string. I can convert to a float. Instead of writing integer, I can write float. So what am I doing? Converting from string to a float. So it becomes a what? A decimal number. Is that understood? So if I run this now, that gives me 15.0. Initially it was 15, right? Remember I told you the value assigned to a variable determines the data type, isn't it? Initially, I assigned side 2 as an integer. Can you remember? Side 2 was what? Was an integer value. Side 1 is what? Is an integer. Side 2 is what? Is an integer. It makes side 3 to become an integer. Is that understood? Since I'm converting this to a float, so that means that side 1 is an integer, side 2 is a float. When you add an integer to a float, it becomes a float. That means side 3 becomes a float. That is why you see this data, the output as what? As a float. Is this understood? So it depends on what you want to work on. Is this understood? Good. You can also convert to a string. After you have converted side 3 is now a float, right? Then you can write that side 3 is equal to str side 3. What have I done, guys? So I have converted side 3 from what? From float to a to a string. Is that understood? I have converted site3 from a float to a string. So this site3 is now a string. Is that understood? If I run this code, then it runs. This 15.0 is not a float, it is a string because I have converted the float to a string. So in this case, I can concatenate this or use anything site3 as a string. So I can write that word is equal to I am from, okay, I am from side 3. Look at what I just did. I added, you think I was adding, right? This is not addition. When you use plus between two strings, it is called concatenation. What do I call it? When you use plus between numeric values, it is called addition. When you use plus between strings, it is called concatenation. Concatenation means joining two strings together. Is that understood? Concatenation means what? Joining two strings together. So if you look at I am from, it is what? It is a string. Site3 is now a string, isn't it? This will not give an error. If you run this, it would give me, okay, 15. Why? Because I printed site3. Let me print word. Then if you run this, it gives me I am from 15.0. Can you see? Because both are strings. If I did not convert this to a string, then this is now a comment, right? I've commented as it will not run, isn't it? So is site3 now a string? It is still a what? It is still a float. So can you say you are trying to add a number to a string? So this is not concatenation. This is now addition. Is that understood? So when you run this now, what does that give to me? It gives an error. You cannot add a float to a string, or you cannot concatenate a float and a string. You can only add a float to a float. You can add an integer to a float. You can add an integer to a complex. You can add a complex to, you can add the numerics data types together. Is that understood? You can only concatenate string with a string. You cannot concatenate a string with another data type. Is this understood, everyone? Good. So if I convert this back to a string, then I still get my value as I am from 15.0. Is this understood, everyone? Good.